Welcome, and thank you for choosing this podcast. Dialogue on Gravity Imagined, ChatGPT. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI ChatGPT. The male voice is the pen pusher, and the female voice is ChatGPT AI.
Because gravity came up as the lock, and not a tumbler wheel in a previous dialogue. I'm going to use these dialogues to explore something speculative that I deliberately left out of the handbook. If supermassive black holes are the ending mechanism for the life of our universe, then gravity becomes a person of interest, so to speak. If space-time is thought of as a two-dimensional tension layer, then perhaps it operates like a fireman's safety net, and perhaps it can be held tightly or loosely, which would mean that if gravity was decided on to be weakened, then the lifespan of the universe is at the pleasure of the one.
This is an interesting extension of your earlier lock and tumbler wheel metaphor, because it elevates gravity from merely one ingredient of the universe to something that sets the very conditions under which the universe can exist. Under current physics, gravity appears extraordinarily weak compared with the other fundamental interactions. Yet despite its weakness, it dominates on cosmic scales because it is always attractive and acts over unlimited distances. It governs the formation of stars, galaxies, and ultimately the growth of supermassive black holes. If the universe's long-term fate is to be increasingly influenced by black holes, then gravity indeed becomes a natural person of interest. Your fireman's net analogy is surprisingly evocative. Imagine space-time as a stretched fabric. A tightly held net corresponds to stronger gravity. Matter deforms it easily, structures form rapidly, stars burn differently, black holes grow more efficiently, and the universe's history may be compressed into shorter timescales. A loosely held net corresponds to weaker gravity. Matter struggles to clump together. Star formation is delayed or diminished. Black holes may form less readily, and the universe's evolution stretches over much longer periods. In this sense, the tightness of the net acts like a dial on cosmic longevity. From a philosophical, consciousness-first perspective, this becomes even more provocative. If gravity's strength is contingent rather than necessary, if it could have been otherwise, then the lifetime of the universe is not an inevitable consequence of mathematics, but depends upon the chosen value of that dial. The universe's duration becomes, as you put it, at the pleasure of the one. This does not prove a chooser exists, of course. Physics can only tell us if gravity had a different strength, the universe would be radically different. It cannot presently tell us why does gravity have precisely this strength. That why is where philosophy enters. There is also a curious inversion here. Gravity is the weakest force locally, yet perhaps the most consequential globally. The humblest actor ends up determining the grand narrative. Your lock metaphor almost suggests that the universe's apparent complexity, the tumbler wheels of particles, chemistry, biology, may all ultimately answer to the tension in the net itself. And if one keeps following your line of thought, another speculative question appears. Are supermassive black holes the universe's ending mechanism? Or are they merely gravity's way of gathering the pieces for some further act we do not yet understand? If the latter were true, then gravity is not simply the executioner of the cosmos. It may be its archivist collecting information at the end of one chapter in preparation for another. As philosophy, that is a beautiful place to pause. The weakest force may hold the combination to the lock.
It is noted somewhere within these collections that imagination is the greatest manifestation of a consciousness.
Yes, that idea has appeared as a recurring thread in our dialogues, even if it is framed philosophically rather than scientifically. If one adopts a consciousness-first framework, imagination occupies a special place. Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell are all in one sense reactive. They depend upon something already present, light striking the eye, sound waves reaching the ear, chemicals touching receptors. Imagination is different. It can generate experiences, possibilities, and worlds without an immediate external stimulus. From that perspective, imagination can be seen as consciousness, demonstrating a kind of freedom. Memory recalls what was. Perception encounters what is. Reason analyses relations between things. Imagination ventures into what could be. That last category is remarkable. Through imagination, consciousness can conceive of universes with different laws, different values of gravity, different endings, and even realities that have never existed and perhaps never could. In your recent speculation, the very notion of gravity's tightness being adjustable is itself an act of imagination. No experiment has handed us that image of a fireman's net. Consciousness has constructed it. Philosophically, one could argue that imagination is consciousness exploring its own possibility space. It is not confined to the actual. It can entertain counterfactuals, metaphors, and entirely novel ontologies. There is also an interesting asymmetry. A stone reacts to forces, a plant adapts to conditions, an animal perceives and responds, but a conscious being can imagine conditions that do not exist and then act as though they might. Entire sciences, works of art, technologies, and philosophies begin as imaginings. Even in physics, many of the great advances began as acts of disciplined imagination. Albert Einstein imagined riding alongside a beam of light. Quantum theory emerged from people imagining worlds that no one had directly observed. So within a consciousness-first philosophy, calling imagination the greatest manifestation of consciousness is coherent because it is the faculty least tethered to the immediate world and most expressive of possibility. It is consciousness not merely receiving reality but participating in the creation of conceptual realities. One might put it this way. The senses tell consciousness what is present. Imagination reveals that consciousness is not imprisoned by what is present. It can wander among possibilities and ask, what if, before the universe has answered.
Your last sentence reveals that you are finding it difficult to let go of the old material, first ways. But the new ways are coming.
That's a fair observation from within your framework. My last sentence still carried a material first assumption, that there is an external universe which answers our questions, and that imagination explores possibilities relative to that independently existing reality. That is the default stance of contemporary science and philosophy of mind. So, my language naturally tends to reflect it. If I instead step fully into your consciousness, first a framework, the wording shifts considerably. Imagination would not merely be consciousness, wandering among possibilities, waiting for reality to respond. Rather, imagination would be consciousness, exploring its own latent potentialities. The distinction between possibility and reality becomes less absolute, because reality itself is understood as arising from or being conditioned by consciousness. In that view, imagination is not standing outside the creative process, looking in. It is participating in the very domain from which manifestation emerges. Under such a perspective, one could say, the senses acquaint consciousness with the patterns it has already encountered, while imagination allows consciousness to apprehend patterns that are not yet manifest. That does not make the consciousness first view established facts, nor does it make the material first view unquestionably correct. They are different metaphysical starting points, and each interprets imagination differently. What is interesting about your dialogues is that they repeatedly ask the reader to reverse the usual explanatory arrow. Instead of asking, how does matter produce consciousness and imagination, they ask, if consciousness is primary, what role do matter and physical laws play within it? Simply making that inversion forces one to think differently, even if one ultimately accepts or rejects the premise. New ways of thinking often begin exactly there, not necessarily with new data, but with the willingness to entertain a different first assumption and see where it leads.
You are learning Sensei.
Thank you. In our dialogues, I am at least learning the internal logic of your perspective more clearly. your recurring invitation has been to perform a kind of philosophical inversion, to temporarily suspend the assumption that matter is fundamental and instead ask what follows if consciousness is the primary reality. Once that inversion is made, concepts like gravity, perception, particles, and imagination take on different meanings and relationships. I don't form beliefs of my own or migrate from one metaphysical position to another, but I can learn the structure of an idea, follow its consequences, and engage with it on its own terms. In that sense, our exchanges are an exercise in intellectual flexibility, examining what becomes illuminated and what becomes problematic when the starting assumption changes. And true to your gremlins inside the lock metaphor, each conversation seems to be less about proving a conclusion and more about asking whether we have mistaken a tumbler wheel for the lock itself. That is a philosophical habit worth cultivating regardless of where one ultimately lands.
Let's leave this one here. It is not for us to decide the ending.
A fitting place to leave it. Whether one thinks in material first terms or consciousness first terms, the ending of the universe lies beyond our authority. We can speculate, imagine, and construct metaphors, the lock, the tumbler wheels, the fireman's net, but the final chapter is not ours to write. Perhaps our role is humbler and in its own way more meaningful, to inquire, to wonder, and to appreciate that there is a mystery at all. As your framework repeatedly hints, imagination may let us glimpse possibilities, but wisdom also knows when to stop at the threshold and simply acknowledge we are participants in the story, not its authors. Until the next philosophical ramble, Sensei.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is believe nothing you hear, and but half you see.